Today on Capecchi's Corner, we are going to solve quadratic equations by factoring. Before we solve by factoring, we're going to look at the zero product property. And what that property says is if a product of two factors is 0, then at least one of the factors must be 0. So for example, number 1, if I were to take 7 times x times y, and I know that the answer is 0, that means that either x is equal to 0 or y is equal to 0. And looking at number 2, the same thing holds true even though we're looking at binomials. If I say that the quantity of x minus 4 times the quantity of x plus 6 equals 0, I know that one of those have to be equal to 0. So x minus 4 is equal to 0, or x plus 6 is equal to 0, and I'm going to solve them. I add 4 to both sides, so x is either equal to 4, or x is equal to negative 6. I do the same thing on the other side. Let's take a look at that. If I were to substitute x is equal to 4, I would get 4 minus 4, which would give us 0. And in my second binomial, I would get 4 plus 6, which would give me 10. And 10 times 0 is equal to 0. Let's look at the same thing as if x were equal to negative 6. In my first binomial, I would get negative 6 minus 4, which gives me negative 10. And negative 6 plus 6 gives me 0. So negative 10 times 0 will give me 0, which is why if I'm going to solve that either x is equal to negative 6 or x is equal to 4 would give me 0 because of the zero product property. And looking at number 1, our directions are telling us to solve. So again, we're not just factoring. We're going to solve, but we're going to solve by factoring. Anytime I have to the second power or higher, I'm going to bring everything to one side and set it equal to 0. Well, this one is already set equal to 0, so I can go right into factoring. There's no greatest common factor. So I notice that my second sign is a plus, so the signs are the same. They're both a plus. The only way I can get to x squared is x and x. Factors of 12 that when I add together I get 7 is 4 and 3. So I can put them, since the signs are the same, in either binomial. So I'm saying that x plus 4 times x plus 3 is equal to 0. Now notice I had an equal sign to start with, and my direction said to solve. And remember, when we have solve as a directions in math, we want to get x equal to a number or a variable equal to a number. X is equal to 7 or y is equal to 3. So we know we're not just factoring here. So because of the zero product property, I know that either x plus 4 has to equal 0 or x plus 3 has to equal 0 in order for my solution to be 0 when I'm multiplying. So I bring 4 to the other side, and I have x is equal to negative 4, or I have x is equal to negative 3. They're my two solutions for number 1. Now, looking at number 2, I don't have my equation set equal to 0. There's my equal sign, there's my wall. So the first thing I have to do is I have to add 18 to both sides, because again, whenever I have the second power or higher, I bring everything to one side and see if I can factor it. So I have x squared minus 9x plus 18. I'm going to write that in standard form. I don't have a greatest common factor, so I can just go right into my two binomials. My signs are the same because of that plus, but this time they're both in negative. The only way I'm going to get to x squared is x and x. So now I'm looking for factors of 18. Then when I add them together, I get 9. So that's going to be 6 and 3. Now again, I know that either x minus 6 is equal to 0 or x minus 3 is equal to 0. Add 6 to both sides. So I know x is either equal to 6 or I'll have x is equal to 3. I'll do the same thing with my other binomial. So there's my solutions, 6 or 3. In number 3, I notice that I already have my equation set equal to 0, so I'm going to look for my greatest common factor, and in this case, everything's divisible by 4. So I'll divide each term divisible by 4. I can do the same thing to the other side. So I have 4 times the quantity of y squared plus y minus 6 is equal to 0. Now I can factor. So I notice that my signs are going to be the opposite because that's a negative, so I have a plus and a minus. The only way I get to y squared is y and y. And because my signs are opposite, I need factors of 6, which when I subtract will get me to 1. So that's 3 and 2. My higher factor is 3, so I know that has to be attached to my plus, so my 3 goes here, and my 2 goes there. Now I need to solve. So I know that 4 times y plus 3 times y minus 2 gives me 0. Now I don't have to do anything with that 4 because there's not a variable attached to it. I can't say that 4 is equal to 0 because 4 is not equal to 0. 4 is equal to 4. So I'm going to set y plus 3 is equal to 0 and y minus 2 is equal to 0. and I'll subtract 3 to either side, and I have y is equal to negative 3. Or again, I'll add 2 to both sides, isolate my variable, and I have y is equal to 2. And looking at number 4, again, I'm looking for a greatest common factor. I already have my equation set equal to 0. This time everything is divisible by 4a, not just 4. So I'll divide everything by 4a, and I'll put my 4a out front, and I'm left with a squared plus a minus 6 is equal to 0. Again, I'll rewrite my 4a. Now this trinomial is similar to my trinomial number 3. So again, my signs are going to be opposite because that's a negative, so I have a plus or minus. The only way I get to a squared is a and a. Factors of 6 that when I subtract I get to 1, so I have 3 and 2. Again, 3 is my higher factor, it's attached to the plus, so I have 3 and 2. Now this is a little different than 3, and then I have 4a times a plus 3 times a minus 2 is equal to 0. So because this first monomial, I can actually set 4a equal to 0 because I do have a variable there. I have a. In number 3, I did not have a variable. I just had 4. And like I said, you can't have 4 equal to 0 because 4 is equal to 4. But in this case, in number 4, I can say 4a could be equal to 0. I'm going to set a plus 3 is equal to 0, and a minus 2 is equal to 0, and I'll solve for a. In my first monomial, I'm going to divide both sides by 4 to isolate my variable, and a is equal to 0. Then I'm going to look at a plus 3 is equal to 0, subtract 3 from either side, and a is equal to negative 3. And then my last binomial there, I'm going to add 2 to either side, and a is equal to 2. So in this case, I have 3 answers. A is either equal to 0, negative 3, or positive 2. In number 5, the first thing I notice is I don't have my equation set equal to 0. So I'm going to have to add 2c to the 5th. And I'm going to do that to both sides. And I want to rewrite my equation in standard form. So my highest power is to the 5th power. So I have 2c to the 5th minus 6c to the 4th minus 36c to the 3rd is equal to 0. Now again, I'm going to look for my greatest common factor, which in this case is 2c to the 3rd. So I'm going to divide everything by 2c to the 3rd. And whatever I do to one side, I'm going to do to the other side. My 2c to the 3rd comes out front, and I'm left with c squared minus 3c minus 18 is equal to 0. So now I'm ready to factor. So I have 2c to the 3rd. My signs are opposite, so I'm going to have a plus or a minus. C squared gives me c and c. Factors of 18 that when I subtract I get to 3, so it's going to be 6 and 3. My higher factor is 6, so it's going to be attached to a negative, so 6 goes here and 3 goes here, and now I'm ready to solve. Because I have a variable in my first monomial, I can set that equal to 0. And then I have c plus 3 is equal to 0, or c minus 6 is equal to 0. Divide everything by 2, and I have c cubed is equal to 0. Now we haven't done this yet. We haven't done square roots yet or cube roots, but I do know that c to the 3rd means I'm going to take a value and I'm going to multiply that 3 times, and my answer is going to be 0. So I know that c has to be equal to 0. That's the only way I'm going to be able to do that. C plus 3 is equal to 0. I subtract 3, and I have c is equal to negative 3. And then I have c minus 6. I'll add 6 to both sides, and c is equal to 6. So there's my final answer. C is equal to 0, c is equal to negative 3, or c is equal to 6. Now number 6 looks slightly different. I have x squared minus 3x is equal to 0. So it's a binomial. We've been working with trinomials. But let's take a look. The first thing I'm always looking for is a greatest common factor. So on my left-hand side, I can take x is in both terms, so I can divide everything by x. Whatever I do to one side, I do to the other side. So I'm going to pull out my x there, and I'm left with x minus 3 is equal to 0. Now, students often get confused by this, so let's just take a look at it. Remember, by the zero product property, either x has to equal 0 or x minus 3 has to equal 0 in order for my result to be 0. So let's set them equal to 0. X is equal to 0. X minus 3 is equal to 0. X equals 0 is already set. I add 3 to the other side. So one of my possibilities is x is equal to 3, and my other one is x is equal to 0. In number 7, it says if the volume of a rectangular prism is x cubed plus 8x to the second plus 15x. What are the measurements of the side? Well, we know the formula for volume is equal to length times width times height. So I know I'm multiplying three things. Now, in looking at my volume that they give me, I know I can try to break that down and see what happens. So I'm going to rewrite that down here. X cubed plus 8x to the second plus 15x. Now, in trying to break it down, I can see if I can factor it. There is a greatest common factor of x, so I'll factor that out. And I'm left with x squared plus 8x plus 15. So now I have a trinomial. I'm going to see if I can factor that. Signs are the same. They're both a plus. Factors of 15 that when I add together I get 8 is 5 and 3. So I know I have 5 and 3. The only way I'm going to get to x squared is x and x. So what are the measurements of the sides? One side is x plus 5, and one side is x plus 3. And looking at our last problem for today, it says what is the product of the solutions of the equation x squared minus 3x minus 10 is equal to 0? Well, we know product means to multiply, and it's talking about the solutions of the equation. So the first thing I have to do is solve this. Now it's already set equal to 0. I don't have a greatest common factor, so I can just try to factor it. So I have x and x. That's the only way I'm going to get to x squared. My signs are opposite because of that negative. So I'm looking for factors of 10 that when I subtract, I get to 3. So it'll be 5 and 2. My 5 is my higher factor that has to be attached to the negative. So my 5 will go through here, and my 2 will go there. Now I'm going to solve it. So I have x plus 2 is equal to 0, and x minus 5 is equal to 0. So x is equal to negative 2. I'll bring the negative 2 to both sides. And I also know that x is going to equal to 5. Now in this case I'm not done. It says if I go back to the problem, what is the product of the solutions? So I know I need to multiply, so I have negative 2 times 5 will give me negative 10, which is the product of the solutions of the given equation.